Hi everybody. Today we start our new read aloud called Charlotte's Web, and this is by E.B. White, and I'm just going to read to you the first chapter. Chapter 1, Before Breakfast. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. "Out to the hog house," replied Mrs. Arable. "Some pigs were born last night." "I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8. "Well," said her mother, "one of the pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything. So your father's decided to do away with it." "Do away with it?" shrieked Fern. "You mean kill it just 'cause it's smaller than the others?" Mrs. Arable put a pitcher of cream on the table. "Don't yell, Fern," she said. "Your father's right. The pig will die anyway." Fern pushed her chair out of the way and ran outside. The grass was wet and the earth smelled like springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time that she caught up with her father. "Please don't kill it," she sobbed. "It's unfair." Mr. Arable stopped walking. "Fern," he said gently, "you'll have to learn to control yourself." "Control myself?" yelled Fern. "This is a matter of life and death, and you're talking about me controlling myself?" Tears ran down her cheeks as she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hands. "Fern," said Mr. Arable, "I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now go along." "But it's unfair," cried Fern. "The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been very small at birth, would you have killed me?" Mr. Arable smiled. "Certainly not," he said, looking at her with love. "But this is different. A girl is one thing. A little runty pig is another." "I see no difference," replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. "This is the most terrible case of injustice I've ever heard of." A look came over John Arable's face. He seemed to almost cry himself. "All right," he said. "You go back in the house, and I'll bring the runt when I come in. I'll let you start it on a bottle like a baby, and then you'll see what trouble a pig can be." When Mr. Arable returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled like coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. "Put it on the chair," said Mrs. Arable. Mr. Arable set down the carton at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink and washed his hands and dried them. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying. As she approached her chair, the carton wobbled, and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father. Then she lifted the lid, and inside, looking up at her, was a newborn pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. "He's yours," said Mr. Arable. "Saved from an untimely death, and may the good Lord forgive me for this foolishness." Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. "Oh," she said, "look at him. He's absolutely perfect." She closed the carton carefully. First she kissed her father, then she kissed her mother, and then she opened the lid again, lifted out the pig, and held it against her cheek. At this moment her brother Avery came into the room. Avery was 10. He was heavily armed, with a rifle in one hand, a wooden dagger in the other. "What's that?" he demanded. "What's Fern got?" "She's got a guest for breakfast," said Mrs. Arable. "Wash your hands and face, Avery." "Let's see it," said Avery, setting his gun down. "You call that miserable thing a pig?" "That's a fine specimen of a pig, no bigger than a rat." "Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery," said his mother. "The school bus will be here in half an hour." "Can I have a pig too, Pop?" he said. "Nope. I only distribute pigs to early risers," said Mr. Arable. Fern was up at daylight, trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she has a pig. A small one to be sure, but nonetheless it is a pig. It just shows what can happen if a person gets out of bed early promptly. Now let's eat." But Fern couldn't eat till her pig had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arable found a baby's nursing bottle and a rubber nipple. She poured warm milk into the bottle, fitted the nipple over the top, and handed it to Fern. "Give him some breakfast," she said. A minute later, Fern was seated at the floor in the kitchen with her infant between her knees, teaching it to suck from the bottle. The pig, though tiny, had a good appetite and caught on very quickly. The school bus honked from the road. "Run!" commanded Mrs. Arable, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed his gun and another donut. The children ran out of the door and climbed onto the bus. Fern took no notice of the other kids on the bus. She just sat and stared out the window, thinking what a blissful world it was now, and how lucky she was to have entire charge of a pig. By the time she reached school, Fern had named her pet, selecting the most beautiful name that she could think of. "Its name is Wilbur," she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when the teacher said, "Fern, what's the capital of Pennsylvania?" "Wilbur," replied Fern dreamily. The pupils all giggled. and Fern blushed. I hope you liked the first chapter.